All right, what's going on, y'all? We got another episode, another class, political education class with community movement builders. And today we are celebrating Harriet Tubman Day. If you didn't know, that's today, Harriet Tubman. This is the day we celebrated March 10th. That's on our African people's holiday list. And this is we looking at the great queen mother of resistance. It's a powerful symbol in our history. And African history as a whole. Some people say new African history, but all of our history. And so, of course, to celebrate Harriet Tubman Day, I decided to pull out a book that I bought. I wasn't able to read it before until now. That looks at the history of the Underground Railroad. And this is the reason why I chose this book, other than the fact that today's Harriet Tubman Day, is the fact that we rarely go into just straight up Black history. Sometimes we get so caught up with some of our theories. I think it's best to look at our people's natural resistance, like without even having ideology, this shit that people just did naturally, to kind of really reflect what I think a good, accurate representation of what our resistance would probably look like on the ground for real, without even having to tell people what socialism is or what anarchism is, Pan-African or anything. So, with that being said, is there any thoughts on the book? Any thoughts? Anybody that read it? Or any thoughts on Harriet Tubman at all? Harriet Tubman Day? Anything?
I'll just say real quick that I found the reading definitely interesting, primarily because it's focused on the relationship between geography and resistance. Um, and I like that aspect of it. Also, like that it is historical. And when I was reading it, I felt sort of like this would be good for inspiration or just um, allowing people to have to sharpen their actual or be able to envision what resistance will actually look like because it's real, something that actually happened and it's documented. So I really thought it was interesting as far as geography and giving you actual historical examples of real resistance.
Right. And especially resistance here in America, right? And that's even one of the first things I wanted to get into, right? Because she was going on here to talk about gone are the century-old definitions of the Underground Railroad, dominated by images of shivering, frightened fugitive slaves. Fading away are the biased images of solitary men criminalized for escaping slavery, usually on foot and aided by sympathetic white abolitionists working within a loosely organized network dominated by kindly Quakers. Um, you know, and they go on to say historian Larry calls the Underground Railroad America's favorite legend. And the reason why I underlined that was because I really wanted to ask the question well, let me go and read this second part too. Right. Historically, however, the Underground Railroad narrative has slanted away from the harrowing stories of free Blacks contending with the tyranny of slavery toward interactions better known and documented groups of Quaker families, white abolitionists, and other anti-slavery activists. Invariably, these are the main focus of Underground Railroad literature. So I wanted to ask the question of what's the importance of studying our history and controlling our own narrative? Because it's I think what the author was saying was that when we don't control our own images, they always tell us who our heroes are, right? And they always like to add in they people. And I think in this context, they like to paint a certain narrative. In my opinion, what I saw a lot of times, or what I see is Black folks needing white folks to save them. Yeah, they were doing resistance, Blacks on their own, but if it wasn't for the abolitionists, they really wouldn't have been free. You know what I mean? It's like Black probably couldn't do it by themselves, and that's why y'all really need us, really. You know what I'm saying? So I wanted to ask the question is why is it important for us to control our own narrative? Anybody? Going once, going twice. All right, Well, I'm gonna say one reason why I think it's important to control our narrative is just like what I just said, man. Because you get into this question of like, this is similar to the need. Are you supposed to read white people or not, for example, right? And part of the critique on why people say you shouldn't read white people is the fact that they may control the narrative of the story, and they may try to drive a certain point home that doesn't reflect a cultural outlook of your people, and I think that's one of the important reasons is because um once you control the narrative, you could tell the story how you want it to go. And we could say, yeah, there might have been some white folks that did help, but we could downplay it the way that they downplay Black resistance, right? Any
Right.
thoughts on that?
I think perspective is key. I think this text here is an example of why it's important to control your own narrative. Because we can focus on what we did from our perspective, um, as opposed as for the story being told through someone else's lens. So I think this text right here is a material example of why it's important for us to control our own narrative.
Mm-hmm. And I think also too, like what you see a lot of times, I feel like what I heard before in the past was that Black families were just broken up as a result of slavery. And so I feel like there's a huge downplay of Black family resistance, or what role the Black family played in our overall resistance and Black struggle. Right. And so I think that's another point that I thought the author brought up very great was just like there was a role that Black family played. Um, but you don't really hear that too much. I mean, did you, I mean, you know what I'm saying, Jadori? I mean, do you feel that way or do you feel differently? Was there some things that you heard like about Black families and slavery and so on and so forth?
Well, I know currently individual or being individualistic is a major thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
today, generally speaking, not just in the Black community, but generally speaking, family is not seen as something important in a sense. It's all about um, being not necessarily on your own, but being just about you as the center, as
Right.
opposed to a family or a community. It's about just doing what's best for you as a center. So it's important to have and not and it's not in a sense that maybe you would consider it as an anarchist. It's more in a capitalist sense of what it means to be the center or be the individual. So I think it's important to have narratives counteract that. And this test does provide some narrative to counteract that.
African American communities connected through family relations and intermarriage, church organizations, benevolent societies, and the fraternal structure of the Prince Hall Masons. Despite the fact that the average escapee from slavery was a young single male, maintaining family connections motivated escapes, particularly when imminent sale threatened to break up the family. Black family members understood the cost of freedom and stalwartly offered an aid to escapees so they too could taste its fruits. Free Blacks or self-liberated men and women succeeded in purchasing freedom for themselves and their loved ones. At times, they also had the wherewithal to purchase land to establish towns and settlements or migrate to areas where other free Blacks had settled. So again, I kind of wanted to ask, like, Yafael, you still there? KD, you there?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
here.
Yeah,
Can
I
you hear
was
me?
gonna ask. I was gonna ask if you had any thoughts on like what role the Black family plays, like in resistance, like, and do you think that people are tearing down the road like Black men have played? Because like this book kind of just says like Black men that got free, they came back and got their family. Do you think that people tear down the image of Black men and Black families?
I just want to admire their courage because I don't know how they did it. To have small kids and trying to escape, man, I couldn't imagine. And then for as the men of having a heart to where you had freedom, but you went back and got your family, man. Courage, respect to our ancestors for pulling it off, you know.
Yeah, yeah, I'm
I
with
just want to yeah, I want to second what KD is saying. I think in the text it actually talks about some examples of that. I think it says Harriet Tubman actually went back and got her brothers, one of her brothers as well. And reading the text, I felt there was moments when I was reading the text where I felt like, wow, these people did have a lot of courage, and it's easy to say that you would do something in a situation, but you really don't know if you would react the same in a situation unless you've been through similar circumstances. Like I don't know if I would have been able to do what many of them did with their church institutions, with their secular society institutions, with their small rural communities and things like that. Because of course the text also mentions some of them lost their lives harboring or trying to help enslaved people and escape. So I felt a few times reading the text where like there was just a recognition of the courage and how much strength it would take to do what they did.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things is people say like I wouldn't have been enslaved, I'd have fought back, but what's a current institution of slavery is prison, and look how hard it is to escape from a prison, and look how much prisons aren't abolished. People haven't overthrown the institution of slavery, partially because it's justified. Um, it's justified in the logic of the system itself. You know, the values of it, all of that plays a role, and the institution of slavery was the same thing. It's like it was justified, right? It was justified to kidnap somebody who was considered three-fourths of a human being or whatever, right? So it's like a lot of people I think talk a lot of shit, but if they're not doing anything now, they wouldn't have done nothing then. So but also I think it's very important. I was moved, when I read that in the text that, what really was important to people was the breakup of the family, and that motivate them to escape, to either to get their own freedom or to come back and buy so they could buy others freedom so they can keep the family together. And I just heard so many narratives that out there that's like, oh, when people's kids were taken away, the slaves was just like, ain't nothing we could do, man. And they would just kind of cry and wait for white Jesus to come, and that's like one of the best things I liked about the text too. Any other comments on Black families and their role in resistance? What's today's what do you think the role Black families can play today in resistance? Anybody?
I think setting the culture, bringing
Mm,
awareness, because if you don't talk to your kids, man, then you know you pretty much setting them up for doom. World of and being in the U.S. where we're dealing with white imperialism, it's important that you talk to your kids about it.
yeah, that was also in the book too, man. I think it's on page 127. Here it is right here. Children inherited their parents' activism. Brothers and sisters worked together, whole families cooperated in rescue efforts, right? Um, and I think it was a part of the book where they said Harriet Tubman actually was inspired from her father to get involved with the freedom work, which I thought was amazing because I never knew that, and that just really reminded me page 128. Let me see if I can find that.
Yeah, I think I remember the text saying that her father actually helped her a lot with the mission to save her brother. I think he helped her with that, with mapping out getting her brother back. I think that's what the text said.
Yeah, Harriet Tubman also came under the powerful influence of her father, Ben Ross, and relied on his aid, particularly in engineering the escape of her two brothers from Maryland's Dorchester County on Christmas Day, 1854. Powerful. What that reminded me of was Malcolm X, because I think his parents were in the UNIA, right? And that's important what you just said, man, establishing a legacy. So it's important to do that, man. It's important to establish that kind of legacy of resistance for the children and carry on that legacy. Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Just a question for you. Do you think families are built that way these days, or do you think families are pulled to too many separate directions these days with capitalism and so stratified?
Yeah, that's hard. That's a hard question because while I am talking the importance of Black families, there has been sort of a breakdown, I think, attacks too. And not only that, but I think some of our communities are made up of interwoven families, right? Like half brothers and stepsisters and so on and so forth. But I think the book talked about it, and I didn't write down exactly where they did, but I remember they talked about, like, when some people got free, they were adopted, right? Like into certain families, so there was still a vibe, in a sense of like, we're going to do this together. So we're all free, right? In a sense. And so for me, I think nowadays, like you said earlier, there's been this huge push for individualism that has broken down that need for community, which is a huge problem. But I think what could bring that back is allowing for community to be intertwined with African identity in all of its forms, whether it's New African, so on and so forth, that we should look at each other like that. We should look at each other. Those are our kids. We can raise them together, so on and so forth. So I think it's possible that we can bring it back, but we have to be intentional in doing it. So, it's like, we should have certain times, and we should have, old times where we get together and we're able to, look after each other's kids, so on and so forth. And we know everybody's situations with that, so to speak. You know what I mean? So yeah, but I do think that it's rougher in today's world to do that, but it's always going to remain, especially for those of us who understand. Which, I want to show a picture here. What about you? How do you feel about your own question before I go on?
It's interesting. Families today, I'm not sure if we'll ever get back to that point, unless there's some type of mass uprising. And even then, I don't know if that will, because I just think things are too individual these days. Like, I don't, there may be particular individuals within each family that is politically aware and active, but it doesn't seem to me to be a family type of orientation today, where there's families that are deeply involved, at least broadly, at least the collectives I'm aware of. It's always individuals from families, as opposed to families coming into an organization or families coming into a collective. It's always individuals from a family. So maybe the family would be defined differently. I'm not sure, along political lines.
Political families. Yeah. I like
Right.
that. Yeah. I like that. Yeah.
I want to add to my brother's point with the family structures. So,
I didn't. Was that
can you
somebody
hear
else?
me? Yeah, I'm Nesta.
Oh, okay, okay,
Can you hear
okay.
me?
Hey, what's going on? Okay, I
I'm
guess
good, man.
just say hey, it's Nesta, then go ahead with your comment. Go ahead.
Okay, got you. So I'll come look at the Caribbean context. In African proverbs, it takes a village to raise a child. That's strong, even within the Caribbean context as well. I think moving to America though, it was a bit different. I think like the capitalism is so ubiquitous up here and it's so powerful that kind of promotes this individualistic mindset where everybody trying to gain paper on their own and kind of dismantling the family along with the prison industrial complex as well, the role that plays in removing fathers from homes and stuff like that too. So yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
I kind of feel that you touched on something. You said you came to America and you saw it was much more individualism. Do you think that that's also in part due to greater like urban development? Like, I kind of feel like outside of the urban, so much urban cities, like it's like the urbanization kind of destroys families almost, versus one that's not into that deeply entrenched in that type of capitalism.
No, yeah, I think that's a valid point for sure. Because
Mm,
I think if you go to some more rural communities, you still have that, I guess, a deeper sense of family there still. But in that sense, the role of capitalism isn't as pervasive in those communities or in those rural communities. So I guess that might be added to your point as well. Um,
mm,
but I think we could kind of tackle that as where the brother went on. We talked about you know redefine our idea of a family. This is
yeah,
not just a general thing of blood related people because we've been so our construct of family been so tackled and infiltrated that we could broaden it and becomes like-minded groups and brothers and sisters come together.
yeah. And so that to me is like one of the main ways we can combat it, because I feel like when I look at certain interest groups, like, it could be like an Islamic group or a Christian group, usually a religious type, they kind of have family bonds there, because it's like people coming together for a common cause. So I think that that's one way we can bring it back, is like, um, comrades, so to speak. But I know, like, me coming from like a kind of black nationalist tradition, I always say, "What's going on, brother or sister?" You know what I'm saying? It kind of gives that same kind of feeling, So yeah.
No,
Any other?
that's
Go ahead. Go
uh,
ahead.
no, I like how you raise that point, bringing up religion as well, though. As even myself, for me, it's coming out of the Rastafari tradition. My
Mm.
dad was a Rasta, so that has a strong religious element as well, with with the black nationalist element too. So that's interesting. But even there, so the community acceptance is so much more deeply instilled within us coming up. And you say brother and sister, we say brethren and sister. So it's the same similar type of semantics even. But yeah, that's a strong valid point, my brother.
Right on. Um,
I was gonna, sorry if I'm interrupting what you was about to say. Um,
no, no, go ahead and introduce yourself real quick. Just
yeah, my name is Ryan.
okay.
Sorry, I'm a little bit late. I had just got off work a little late, so sorry about that. But I've
It's
been
all
really
good.
interested in this group and in what you guys are trying to do. Um, I actually found out, so more to Nesta's point, I actually found out about you guys by this guy who runs an organization called Civic Atlanta, and you guys are actually on their page. So when he was telling me about this org that he runs, I found you guys, and I was like, this is cool. But it kind of reminded me because one of the conversations that I initially had with him, he was saying that it's so hard to build momentum into any movement in Atlanta because our actual infrastructure, the lack of public transportation, um, the way that everything is spread out and divided. So when you try to start movements and you try to bring people together to form a sense of community and things like that, you have these geographic barriers pretty much because, we rely on, I'm trying to think of how to say it. If you travel abroad, you'll notice like public transportation is a huge thing. Communities are built in a much more modular and closer together type thing, especially in the inner city type of community, right? And so having that sense of family outside of your immediate home, it's easier to facilitate because you have people who are living on top of each other. They aren't being redlined in a sense and disconnected in that way. And it's, I don't know, it's if you look into it, if you read into it, into how America actually like builds their cities and their urban communities, it is actually very intentional, and it actually is designed in a way to keep people from coming together in a sense, if that makes sense. Not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but it actually is like a whole thing.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
real.
Yeah. And that's powerful because that's one of the reasons why I'm focusing on this page. I hope you guys can see it because they talked about mapping Black settlements and churches, right? So these are like just sections, they got a little into it with they explained that with the AME church, but these are just kind of maps, right? Where like they have these pockets of resistance where people could go to, spread all across the state. And those little circles reminded me of CMB's liberated zone theory, because like that's kind of like what we're trying to set up is like people in their own towns and their own communities, but they run it themselves, like they have community control. But one thing that hit me was, man, what role does gentrification play in destroying or preventing things like this? Having a strong network of powerful, liberated communities and neighborhoods.
I mean, that's real. Like if you look at Atlanta itself, you have Southwest Atlanta, which is a predominantly Black neighborhood. And then what's the next closest one? I mean, you go to Decatur.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? You might
Yeah.
go to Jonesboro on the south, but those are miles away. It's hard to bring people together with such long distances and no easy way to traverse that distance. And on top of that, like if we're talking about Black folks, like we're at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. Cars aren't cheap. It's not, if you don't have public transportation, things like that, it's not easy to get in touch with the people in your community and form those long-standing bridges and things like that. So to your point, like, yeah, gentrification plays a huge role. You end up with white communities, and let's look at, for example, West End. That's a disrupting factor. Like that's a new gap. You know what I'm saying? Like West End won't be ours for too much longer.
Right.
Where does it spread from there?
And I stay all the way out in like East Point, not East Point, but Lithonia, like Covington area. So I have to like drive out there in like 45 minutes. And like, but with that, what you just said, why were they able? What was our ancestors? How do you guys think, like, how are they able to, because we had cars. So it takes 40 minutes to go from, Covington to Atlanta, right? But they're on foot. Right? How do you think that they were able to do that back then? What's the big difference now? I know we may have hit on it already, but what do you think of some of the differences? Like, how are they able to form these great networks where they can get people to freedom? But it's hard for us to, link up and come together in that same kind of way. Or do you think it's not as hard? I mean,
I think they share the same interests. I think when you're going through it, man, that really brings people together. I think that in our days and time that we're too comfortable. Like we talk all this, Black unity and everything, man, but we're not really willing to really tear this down. I mean, we like a lot of the perks that comes with capitalism. If anyone wants to admit to it, the infrastructure, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Yeah, they don't want to admit to it though, huh?
I was gonna say, like, I was reading about like segregation and how it got started, and like it didn't come from the South, you know. contrary to popular belief, it started in the North. And so immediately after slavery, like farmers and landowners went into sharecropping. And so we always lived in very close proximity with one another. On top of that, what we considered our community, our family, those were the people who we lived directly with. We weren't worried about the people in the next farm over. It was, we got our community here, and how do we support each other? And this is prior to segregation, right? So, but now, when the South, after the South adopted segregation, that's where you start getting into the division of communities and things like that. And then on top of that, like, I think a lot of people do actually believe that there is a benefit to capitalism, to their individual selves, even though they're at the bottom of the barrel, they're not actually benefiting from it at all. It's just the promise of, I could one day be a millionaire, a billionaire. And so I don't want to, give up all that and do something radical where I could lose it all. It's also, but on top of that, it's also the fear of incarceration. It's the fear of death. It's real. I mean, like I don't know.
Yeah.
Fear is real.
Fear is real, and I would think, studying our ancestors, I'm like, man, but they, you tried to get free, you would die, and I'm just thinking, like, man, how do we get that back? But I do think that what we see is the goals, right? Like, if people, the goal of freedom versus the goal of upward mobility, and versus the values, which would be individual merit and not community goal. I could definitely see how the whole game plan, the whole setup is different now. We're facing like almost a different struggle, but I think we could still learn from how our ancestors did it back then. With that being said, I want to go back to this might be a real important question here. We talked about it a little bit, right? We talked about spirituality. And let me read this little part on this section. It says, okay, within the Black church, families form the marrow of the Black community. Deep in the core of the Underground Railroad, African Americans pulled together to create one of the first Black institutions in the United States. In the words of Martin Delany, the Black church was the alpha and omega of all things. It was the center, the cement, the soul of the African American community. Camp meetings in general and annual church conferences ensured the continued circulation of critical knowledge among small local churches and their rural outposts, right? I'll just skip to the bottom here. The Black church supported a pragmatic action plan of racial elevation, self-determination, education, and economic autonomy. There's a couple of questions I wanted to ask here. Let me just start off by asking this. What role, how important was the Black church in terms of pulling together the people back then? In this case, like, what role did having those institutions, having our own institutions, what was so pivotal about that? And how did that aid people in their resistance?
Well, it gave a point of where they can organize at. It gave something agreeable point that they can agree on, a location. That's what I'm trying to say. And then number two, everybody had a common understanding of God. So, with those two things being compatible, so to speak, the perspective on God and actually having a location that white supremacy deemed not necessarily a threat. That's how I feel that the church became the best organized effort in the Black community. And probably in some ways still are, because that's what majority of our people are at, are in the church. And the church, by now, since we ran across European Christianity, is the best organized, just in my opinion. But so that's how I feel that worked.
Yeah, powerful, man. And I was gonna ask you, you stole the question right up under me, but do you think that, what role does the church play today in this form of resistance, if any?
Um, potentially, they could play the greatest role. However, due to a number of different factors, my majority fear, and just due to the, the desire for material gain and not necessarily for individuals, not necessarily collective growth. Um, I think that's the position that they choose to play. But I think individuals such as Martin Luther King and others had it in mind to make the church actual organization that could actually help politically liberate our people, our community. Um, as of today, I think that everybody wants to sort of bling bling and sort of compete because I'm way in Dallas, Texas, and the one thing that I see in Dallas, Texas may not be maybe similar to what's going on. I see a church there. What that tells me is that my people are attracted to church or attracted to spirituality, but yet by the fact that I see two churches across the street from one another shows that there's a bit of competition that exists. So that's kind of how I look at the church. But the church does have probably the best potential as far as the level of organization. And I think it took half a century or more to get it to the level of the organization that we have, because we used to have churches in the woods, kind of in private, so to speak, when we were trying to determine our own destiny. When the master let us off let us do it in private, outside of his eyesight, we tried to do it in private. But nevertheless, I think it's the best organization I think that we have currently as far as the potential. The practical part of it is that it's not being used to its full potential at this point today. And I highly doubt that that's the goal and the aims of those who, represent the church. The church itself. That's not their goal.
Powerful. Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, I want to jump in, man.
All right.
Besides, Reverend Trap Pastor Reverend Slaughter, man, you rarely ever hear preachers talk about liberation. Where in the Bible, Jesus is all about liberating the Jews, but that conversation just not happening in Black churches anymore. Maybe they touch on your morality, maybe they touch on spookism, the spiritual aspect, but never talk about the liberation, about freeing your people. Like we're Black people and we're being under a government, a foreign government, technically. You know what I mean? So why aren't we talking about liberating us in the church? But they don't these days anymore.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, and that's a good example because Reverend Slaughter at the Beloved Community Church here in Atlanta, man, he always opened up a space to all kind of groups to come and do all kind of meetings and stuff like that. And I remember watching something from Kwame Ture, and he said, a lot of Black folks in resistance and revolutionaries, they had to go to a church to hold their meetings. That was the only space they could have, and I think we should think about modeling ourselves after, because like you said, you fail. They are everywhere. You get at least like two churches across the street from each other. I keep thinking to myself, what if those were two, I don't know, revolutionary groups across the street from each other or something? But I feel like what we miss is that kind of institutional building and just deep entrenchment in the community. Like I think we kind of missed that, but at the same time, I kind of feel like some of the things that I've had an issue with before is like people demanding that everybody else give up their spiritual beliefs to participate, when clearly that Christianity was so deeply entrenched. I think, could there have been a way that you could politicize it to use it to get people to move on, you know. But is there any other thoughts on the questions I had?
Yeah, I got something I want to add.
Okay.
I think religion played such a big role in the Black liberation movement, not just in America, but also in South Africa. They got that anti-apartheid movement with Desmond Tutu and the different churches there. I think what we see, the reason for that is religion is probably the second biggest social institution that we find beside the family, you know. So it offered a place for the organizations to gather and people to come together with like-minded views. I think what we find now, the reason why it doesn't play its role that it used to play at a certain time, I guess. I think that the churches, for the most part, have become corporatized, where they've become funded by these large groups, so they can't preach the same liberation message that they once could, you know, because the money that's backing it don't allow it. So I think that's the issue that we face right now.
Yeah. I feel like I know he there was a good critique I read in here. He says Black abolitionists and journalists Martin Delany, Marianne Shea, and Frederick Douglass criticized the Black clergy for their insolent bearing, accommodating tone, and submissive behavior of their uneducated ministers. Nonetheless, Black ministers shouldered the major responsibilities of leadership. Churches and their ministers formed natural alliances in the campaign against slavery. I feel like I see this today. You know, like we criticize these church leaders, but they still like, you know, here in Georgia, you have Warnock, he won, and him and homeboy, dang, I forget his name. Anyway, him and dude, you know, it was Christianity was so entrenched in these arguments, you know, but I feel like this thing still plays where you know, the religion still holds leadership amongst the Black masses, and the critiques against it, it's like they're not even saying how to use Christianity to push for liberation, like KD, what you said about liberation. It's just all strictly around like these kind of reactionary values, you know. And so I think that's one of the reasons why it's like even the misleadership within the churches, you know. I think that's one of the reasons why it gets downplayed. Yeah. Any other thoughts before I move on? All right. I wanted to discuss this part here. This is about education. It says free Blacks were keenly aware of the strident stance Southern slaveholders took against educating Blacks. Frederick Douglass describes the slaveholders' belief that the noble and refining influences of education rendered Blacks unfit to be slaves. It is almost an unpardonable offense to teach slaves to read. Douglass fumed, best to keep them shut up in mental darkness. Does education do that to our people today? Does it do that to us? And when I mean education, I mean public schools, HBCUs. I mean, is it the same kind of game? Are they holding us? Are they keeping us in the type of mental darkness against capitalism? I mean, I feel like I got an answer. I could say like they obviously repeat the capitalist worldview, but has anybody got a anything they want to say to that? You know, what's the importance of building our own social institutions?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, aside from the things that are obscured and organized like educational institutions, I think like, okay, let's take the medical field, for example. There's a lot of anti-Blackness within medicine that is taught within actual high-ranking medical teaching institutions. Like, I mean, Black people don't feel pain. Black babies don't respond the same as white babies, so on and so forth. Like, whether you choose to believe that, that's a personal choice. But these things are taught in actual educational institutions throughout the country in various fields. It's not just medicine. It's in finance. I mean, I loosely work in finance, but like there is a undercurrent of beliefs that say like you should not grant loans to certain people, you should not do so on and so forth. But it's fostered as a teaching mechanism. Like this, we have proof. This is empirical evidence. You shouldn't do this thing. When in reality, no other method has been tried. It's just all based on, I don't know, somebody in the past who just felt the way.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll add on real quick. Education definitely keeps us in a mental darkness, but the way that it does it these days is that it gives you the skills and tools you need to basically survive in society, but you're not really learning anything that's really useful to your people's self-liberation. Like my little brother, he's like 13, 14 years old, and he's really capable in school. You know, he's really capable. They want him taking, certain um, advanced classes and so forth. But I always feel the need to try to push some type of literature on them, or have him watch a certain documentary, or try to introduce something, because although he's capable and he's learning, he's not necessarily learning about liberation or what it means to be an African or about his own people. So they definitely keep us in mental darkness, although it's different. They don't mind teaching us how to read. It's just they're not going to teach you what you need to read, or how to look at what you read from a certain perspective. But they definitely teach you how to read.
That's a good point. Because that kind of feeds into the system, right? Like they give you, so they give you education that's gonna help them and benefit them. So now it's like we're gonna not give you education. We're gonna give you education that it only makes sense for you to feed into these lies, right? It only and it's almost like if you don't counter it any kind of way, you might start to believe it. Like whether you're in, like he said, in finance or in the medical industry, so on and so forth. Let me ask this question. It may not be an either or, but do you think strategically, do you think it would be more advantageous for us, wherever you may be, to build your own institutions or take over governing institutions? So like, if schools already exist, should you try to enter into that space, or should you try to create your own? Or should we, try to manage both?
I think it's important first and foremost. I guess we focus even on our families,
Mm,
our kids, and start it, make that be the foundation of our education system rather than a preschool or a pre-K or a daycare or something like that. That the home be the foundation. So when they do enter into those institutions, even if it's managed by a different class or group, it's just to attain the certification and the requirements in order to be successful in the world out there. But it's not necessarily to where a worldview could be changed. Malcolm said, "Only a fool will let his enemy teach his children." So that you don't want that to be the focus on, the focus for your child's education. But to answer your question directly, though, I think there's a way for us to do both, I guess. So I think the HBCUs play a big role in that. How the role they played in terms of the Black liberation struggle. So much of our freedom fighters and leaders came out of the HBCUs. So I think that's important. But at the same time, we got the PWIs, and they produce a lot of Black freedom fighters too. So I don't think either or is the answer. I think it could do both.
yeah.
Yeah, to Nessa's point, I think we should take a Robin Hood approach, and more so into these institutions to the point where they benefit us, extract that knowledge, extract those resources, and then come back to your community and start your own. Because the truth of the matter is, we ain't got it. They do.
Mm,
Take what you can get from outside the community and bring it back to your community, and not necessarily take everything for what it is, but more so like these are, you know, these things are beneficial, these things aren't. Like, learn what's not working, learn what's working, and then bring that back to your community. Start your own from there. But I mean, that's definitely a mixed approach, you know, of integrating ourselves into external institutions and also, you know, extracting those resources and bringing them back to start our own eventually at some point when we feel we can accommodate that.
I would say that it's okay to have individuals in certain institutions that are learning the knowledge that the institution has and bringing it back. But for the most part, I think our communities or our collectives of political organizations need to be focused on building our own institutions and trying to build power to counteract power or to counteract the state. I think that's what we should primarily be focused on as communities or collectives of political bodies. But I do think there's going to be individuals who are inside these institutions, and it is important that they bring resources from those institutions. But most of our energy, I think, should be going into building institutions and trying to build areas of autonomy.
Gotcha.
Hey, to add on to that, can we just keep it black, man? It seems like whenever we build something, it just seems like it get hijacked. It seems like we love inviting the nice white folks, man, and it just whatever our intention was in the beginning always change and always becomes something else when we start inviting outsiders.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons why I brought that up in the beginning, was just like, you see, like whenever they tell the story, they make it seem like we couldn't do it by ourselves. You know, we needed to have been aided by white folks. And so I think like what you're talking about is almost like indoctrinated, I think, in the minds of Black folks. Like it's almost like they believe they can't do it by themselves, you know? Mm-hmm. All right. Well, you know, that was a short class today. I enjoyed this reading. I enjoyed this discussion. We got two big events happening tomorrow. We got the Black Book Exchange happening at the Beloved Community Church from 1 to 3. Y'all can check that out. Bring a book. We're going to be discussing Free the People Army with Kalonji. How to build the People's Army with Kalonji. So that's 1 to 3 at the Beloved Community Church. And then that's from 1 to 3. And then from 2 to 5, we're going to be talking about the Black Palestinian struggle and how it relates to Stop Cop City at Little 5 Points. So that's two things we're going to be going to tomorrow. So yeah, man, thank you guys for coming. And we're going to start doing monthly runs too. So on a third Saturdays. And so this third Saturday, we're going to go back over some of this material because it is Harriet Tubman Day. So big shout out. But yeah, thank you guys for coming. That's it.
All right. Peace, y'all.
Thanks.